Стрелку. Я с радостью представляю сегодняшнего нашего лектора. Я думаю, что на самом деле в представлении он не очень нуждается по количеству народа, которое сегодня собралось на Стрелке. Это Патрик Шумахер, партнер британского архитектурного бюро Захи. Собственно, вместе с Захи Патрик работает с 1988 года, создает вместе с ней проекты в рамках направления параметрической архитектуры. Сегодня Патрик на Стрелке расскажет про свою новую книгу, точнее, первый том этой книги «Из архитектуры», самого воссоздания архитектуры, вышел в 2010 году. В начале 2012 года вышел второй том этой книжки, о которой Патрик расскажет сегодня. И также Патрик расскажет о том, что он делает сейчас, и о том, почему архитектура является одним из лучших средств коммуникации между городом и жителями города. Спасибо большое. Представляю с радостью Патрика.
One, two, three. Welcome everybody. This will be rather long lecture. I start
Сегодня будет достаточно длинная лекция. Я бы хотел начать с образов, с визуализацией, хорошо известных мест, ну и некоторых более недавно свежих. Затем я хотела перейти к более теоретической части лекции, и мы поговорим в этом контексте о некоторых теориях или тезисах и положениях, которые были разработаны в этом контексте. Итак, книга, которая была опубликована в двух томах, «Самовоссоздание архитектуры». Это моя попытка придать смысл, значение тем 20 годам практически мое движение в архитектуре, как я, так сказать, развивался, сам развивался, к чему я стремился, и каким образом это все встраивалось в глобальные тенденции. И я бы хотел, так сказать, для того, чтобы это все уложилось в некий мейнстрим, показать, какое влияние это оказало в принципе на модернизм как таковой. Допустим, 10 лет инкубации эра модернизма прошла, теперь новые идеи, новые концепции, новые эпохальные движения вперед. И поэтому я думаю, что я нахожусь, что мы находимся сейчас на таком же этапе, переломном этапе, то есть это коллективное исследование работы, большие шаги вперед, новые исследования, которые появляются и оказывают свое влияние на существующую культуру. Я буду говорить об некоторых особенных аспектах всего процесса, которые я считаю важными и актуальными во многих аспектах, для того, чтобы понять, что происходит. Что я называю компетенцией архитектурного дизайна, что именно связано с коммуникацией, с коммуникационной компонентой. Потому что я считаю, что в принципе любой дизайн это коммуникация, коммуникации, и, собственно, это является интерфейсом коммуникации. И дизайн продуктов, дизайн моды, ну, любой дизайн, графический дизайн, весь любой дизайн — это, собственно, создание платформы для того, чтобы продвигать дальше коммуникацию. То есть это будет основная тема, которая является одной из подтем моей книги, которая там широко освещена. Но, кроме того, для начала я хотел бы еще раз показать вам несколько изображений. Посмотрите, очень интересный проект. С одной стороны, тривиальный, с другой стороны, не такой уж тривиальный. Это, соответственно, некая пересадка между парковкой автомобилей, и вот сюда подходят трамваи и автобусы. То есть это вот такая вот переделанная площадка. И сейчас это стало своего рода физической площадкой, которая показывает идентичность, коммуницирует, функционально коммуницирует с устройством. Видите, она определенным образом направлена. И все элементы, структурные элементы, все прагматические аспекты данного дизайна, они представлены здесь в своего рода универсальном формализме, унифицированном формализме. То есть это специальная графика, которая создает идентичность и создает ряд процессов, которые неразрывно вплетаются в этот проект. То же самое вы можете увидеть и в дизайне многих музеев, и культурных мест, таких центров, фокусов современной коммуникации, профессиональной коммуникации. Ну и подобного рода примеры представлены здесь, как вы видите, музеи, допустим, как музей в Волсбурге, конечно же, музей в Риме, который имеет определенные характеристики и черты, который отражает новости. Ну, все работы, которые я представляю, это все работы, представляющие параметризм, это новая тема, это новое направление, новая эпоха в архитектуре, сейчас в последнее время. И вот видите, что здесь это музей полон современного урбанистического контекста, есть исторические элементы, и все это соответствует направлениям движения в городе. И и создает своего рода определенную коммуникацию посредством искусства. И как видите, опять же, говоря языком, все это когерентно как к экстерьеру, как к внешней стороне, создавая гуманистические пространства, и с другой стороны, это постоянно вплетено из интерьера внутреннего содержания, наполнения, той логики, которая артикулирует пространство, потому что все связано с совместным общением людей, введением в определенные сценарии коммуникации, ситуации коммуникации. То есть если вы попадаете в такое место, то вы получаете очень богатый опыт, получаете огромную информацию, общение с огромным количеством людей. Но я быстро пролистну ряд из этих проектов, чтобы вам дать общее представление. Я думаю, что большинство из них в какой-то степени знакомы. То есть это пространство, которое постоянно двигается, меняется, двигается, рисует, плывет. То есть у него нет, так сказать, отдельных комнат, отдельных помещений, но оно постоянно развивается, перетекает из одного в другое. Каждый новый шаг, каждое новое движение — это новое открытие. И как вы видите, здесь, вы находитесь внутри, и вы можете посмотреть на внутреннюю структуру, вы можете оглянуться назад, вы прыгнуть назад и заглянуть внутрь. То есть это дает возможность обзора. То есть вы находитесь своего рода в глубокой среде, уже внутри, в глубине этой среды, и погружаетесь в эту комплексность, в эту сложность. То есть где бы вы ни находились в этом пространстве, в этом здании, вы всегда имеете возможность множественного выбора, куда пойти дальше. Вы эти люди на разных уровнях, в разных направлениях. Это своего рода дополнительная коммуникация и поддержка, новый сценарий движения.
Perhaps this building is
Возможно,
interesting.
это
It's a
здание
train
будет очень
station
интересно. Это
which has different stations. They're all part of a family, so there's a clear identity.
здесь
But
четкое выявление
there's a condition of underground
связи. Это как
station,
вот
an
целое
overground
семейство, видите,
station, a
да, вот у нас
station on the
есть
slope, and
подземная
an arrival at the
здесь
plateau.
станция, то есть это
All
метро, здесь
different,
уже
yet
даже
of
железнодорожные, видите, они
one kind of
переходят одна в другую. То есть это как один генотип, который присутствует и артикулируется в каждой из составляющих элементов, как организм, который несли в себе или общий план мастер-план здания, и внесли в себе нечто общее, но в то же время различались какими-то элементами.
The opera house in Guangzhou is 2 volumes that generate a lot of interesting in-between and outdoor spaces. There's an artificial landscape which interarticulates with the volumes, which has program embedded within it. Here again it's a kind of creates a little coherent world with its own laws and logic to follow. There's outdoor spaces also under the plaza, in between spaces, and the connection from outdoor to indoor is very fluid, very continuous. You can have communication between inside and outside, and again you have offerings and aspects to move through above, below, in all directions. There's a deep layer space, kind of spatial simultaneity. And then you step into the auditorium, it's yet another world with its own richness and complexity. And a new project we've done in London is a small retail space. It's again created kind of its own rules. It's rule-based, it's complex, it's fluid, it's rich, it's a network of spaces of different qualities, and yet it's kind of an elegant, navigable space. This is the villa we're doing here in Moscow.
Вот то, что мы делаем в Москве.
It's also quite rich. It has a different parts that integrate into a sloping landscape. Peaceful outside, you get a view across the canopy. Here it has a fitness area, social space, and I think the villa is basically in the end a space for communication, to host great parties and have where you meet lots of people and get into contact and.
Контактировать, общаться, вот как это
посмотрите, space for parties. And this is at the top, more private areas where you're actually out there overlooking the landscape.
Здесь можно выйти и посмотреть это на площадке соответствующей. Вот очень интересный интерьер также.
The Aquatic Center in London
is
a big kind of shell integrated in the park. It's like a pavilion in the park. It has 2 pools, the main pool and the secondary pool. And there's a kind of an open structure. These seats will disappear later, so the landscape flows through the space, if you like.
Сиденья они могут исчезать, и, соответственно, это будет такой пейзаж гибкий, перетекающий все ниже и ниже, перекатывающийся, как каскад.
Museum in Glasgow adapted to a condition of 2 rivers.
Адаптированы к
It's
условиям
kind of a
2 рек.
simple path through the
И у
museum
нас вот есть четкий
and
проход через
integrating
музей.
ship
И
outside
вот
into
смотрите,
the kind
каким
of
образом
sequence of exhibits.
корабль снаружи может быть интегрирован вот в эту вот форму здания. Проход через здание. Проект подобного рода. Вот один из них во Франции. Это здание с национальное здание, здесь различные институции находятся, есть отдельные части, которые соединены вот этими большими помещениями, лобби, зонами, это своего рода библиотека, и затем открытое пространство для регионального правительства Южной Франции. Такое комплексное здание, функциональное. Это проект, который у нас, так сказать, эти секционные изменения очень сильно переходят, своего рода графика, такая пространственная графика здания. Очень такая четко выраженная художественный язык, четко здесь мы можем проходить правильную навигацию, исследовать, соответственно, вот эти скользящие поверхности, вот эти вот все пространства для зон лобби, и более такие выделенные, твердые элементы пространства. Вот окна, соответственно, это офисы там уже. Вот окна выглядят вот так, и это офисы с таким затемнением.
And that is experienced both inside and outside, so the logic is also clear from the inside. These kind of sectionally interesting lobby spaces, hub spaces.
Секционно-текучее пространство лобби.
Project hasn't been shown at all yet.
Который совсем еще не был показан.
The Cultural Center in Baku, it's a huge project, cultural center with a park, completely museum, conferencing center, which still have areas, a music hall and the library. And here's the main entrance of one great lobby space. So it is quite fluid, it integrates with the landscape, it looks different from each side, but yet, and has different offerings, different exterior spaces to fill out on, and yet you know that it's one object to navigate. One territory keeps changing, keeps looking different, yet there is a coherency and unity. So it's this unity and difference, this differentiation is at the same time as easy to grasp, to navigate, and understand. And the way it embeds itself in the landscape. Light view. They view this material as also articulating the plaza. There's a continuity of material between roof surfaces and plaza surfaces.
То есть здесь один материал идет на поверхность крыши и
This
поверхность
is the
стен глаза.
rendering, not everything is fully finished.
Ну, здесь пока что не все
If you step
завершено.
in again, this moment is important. Here they communicate, you step in and you see activities on different levels, layered in deep of space. You look outside the building and back onto the building. So you can imagine that at that point of simultaneity you have lots of choices. You can grasp what's going on, not miss everything, and connect and make efficient use of the time to get the most of every hour of your life, if you like. To kind of continuously re-network yourself. We live in a network society where we have to continuously be in touch. What we should do depends on what everybody else is doing. We need to recalibrate, network, stay in touch, and therefore we need spaces where we can see what everybody else is doing, so we're part of a dynamic network of continuous mutual adaptation, if you like. And that's what we need these kind of spaces for. Where we step in, and instead of disappearing into a corridor, elevator, and little cell, we step into a world where we see what's going on, what's unfolding, and can make choices. And you can see the transparency of that space and the different vistas and connections it affords at any point as you move through it. So this building is the museum part, will open later this year. The library part is cascades up into the tall part up to 80 meters. And we realize that with curvature you can articulate, order and articulate much more complexity, because you can follow continuities, you can create, you know whether within the space there's concavity versus convexity, it becomes much more complex yet legible. If you work with angles and corners, the scene pollutes itself quickly, becomes visual chaos quite quickly. And here you get a lot of information elegantly integrated. And this is the music hall. And again, here the topic is to take a system instead of collaging different elements, walls, ceiling, seating, lighting. It's all modulating a single system which delivers all these different functions and therefore creates something quite rich with functionality, but kind of calm and clear in terms of visuality. So it's a kind of increased complexity of life, articulated through a kind of reduction of complexity through visual artistic languages. Similar project in Beijing, totally different function, but again a cornerless space. It's a retail experience, shopping and also office space, working space. And here the point is again is a kind of big space on multiple levels, many choices in view. At each step you see 50 to 100 shops to choose from, to move through. There's a lot of outdoor area. You step in and you can look down and up and all around and layered in depths of space you have the life you want to participate in unfolded in front of you. This is under construction in the center of Beijing. Smaller projects we're finishing in museum in Michigan, a library we're doing in Vienna. And here we have a kind of, we started this game of coding the space. So there are two colors, two types of volumes, a library volume, with the administrative central university volume. And this meanders, they kind of integrate complexity like a puzzle, and then there is this kind of glass gap which has all the unprogrammed public spaces. So this becomes a kind of orienting matrix, both outside and inside. So there's a simple coding of library versus central service versus public space, which structures that complex. And this kind of what I mean by turning the built environment and the building into a system of signification, into a kind of semiotic system. And as you step in, you get again this kind of grand overview, the three-dimensional space of simultaneity, where you can see what's going on throughout the building. And these moments happen 2 or 3 times in the building, so it's not only one, there are 3 such connective atria, if you like. And the second one, the secondary atrium, again with views outside and internal connections. So at this point you can see what's going on and make your next move, which is extremely important in contemporary network society. This is also under construction. Similar program, this is a research and development facility which contains office space, laboratories, contains a library, conferencing center, and a lot of covered outdoor area. And this is in Riyadh for the energy industry. It's also adapted to climatic conditions, so there's a lot of courtyards oriented north. It has a lot of smaller perforations to the exterior and into the courtyard, larger glass areas, and a very kind of communicative texture of outdoor areas connecting. And this is also under construction at the moment. So it's all about differentiating a field which continuously changes but has a logic and order, so you can follow these vectors of transformation from the large to the small, from the intimate to the public, and you can kind of follow these logics and navigate such a field, which makes in the end sense, because it is constructed on rules. Bridge we finished in Abu Dhabi. And here in fact as well there's a kind of uneven rhythm of arches, because there's an island we had to hit and the larger opening and the smaller opening. This also implies to urbanism, so we have here a piece of urbanism in Singapore where we're starting with a very disparate area, collage of different zones and we coming in and connecting with our text to different conditions in a nuanced way, and then create a kind of continuously differentiated field, so there is a lot of difference offered, but it's ordered in a way that it integrates with the context, and that you can follow the logic of this topography, and it's also under construction. Of course, we also doing towers. Towers is a very difficult topic in terms of network society. We need towers because we need to be dense. But within the tower, of course, there's the question, how do you remain connected within it? So we work usually with big atria, and we're trying to differentiate the tower, to have interesting interfaces with the ground surface, bundle towers, or towers which connect with bridges. So how to create towers or open up and make wide at the ground to have more context, how to make the tower participate in that new level of complexity. It's the kind of networking game. And we finished one tower in Marseille, which does some of that. It's very narrow, fits into a context, it opens up broader at the base. It actually also connects here with the horizontal building, and has a series of different types of spaces inside. Finally, a tower which has not been seen yet for the central bank in Iraq on the river Tigris. Also they communicate, it opens up, it has a great kind of atrium and navigation space with panoramic elevators. All the bank was connected to a podium. And these kind of structures are to do with the shading as well in a very hot climate. So it's not a glass tower, it's a kind of environmentally adapted tower. We're doing design as well. So what I'm talking about, the new style, is applies to urbanism, to architecture on all scales, to interiors, but also to the world of design, even including fashion design, furniture design, product design, the totality of the built environment and the totality of the world of architects is brought under the expertise of our discourse. And I think all of it needs to transform, like the time of the Bauhaus. When the Bauhaus took off, it also had ideas about urbanism, architecture, industrial design, the totality, including fashion design. So the totality of the built environment, the totality of the world of architects is under the spell of our discourse, of our direction, of our collective leadership of an avant-garde, and like the Bauhaus transformed the totality of the world of the built environment and the world of products over 50 years, and including this design is a kind of, still under the spell of Bauhaus. I think we need to change, and we can make the same impact now on the basis of parametrism. So we have got engaged in furniture design, in fact, fashion design, product design, car design, interior design, on all levels, kitchens, cars, handbags, shoes. Everything is part of that, and everything is an interface of communication. We navigate the world aesthetically by the kind of environment we stimulate by, we're drawn to. We pick out the communication partners on the basis of their looks and fashion, so it's an important interface of communication, ultimately. So we're looking at this as a new table we just created. We're opening a showroom as well in London, in our office, and we have 2 offices in London, so we're just in the raw pictures. Opening a showroom where we show some of our products and environments and installations. So if you come to London, pass by and have a look at the showroom. So the headline here is what we're aiming at is what I call complex variegated order. So what I believe is that architecture's task now is to organize and articulate the societal complexity of post-Fordist network society. Post-Fordist because before the era of modernism was Fordism, like the Ford factory, the mass reproduction of a very handful of products. endlessly repeated for decades, so that in the end the task at this point is to give everybody the same standard of living, in terms of an industrial standard, everybody the same house, the same car, the fridge, television, telephone, etc. Television had only one channel as well, logically. So this was the era of modernism, where you had to be efficient, you know what to produce, and you just focus on dividing the work into small parcels and everybody beaver away for decades doing the same thing ever more efficiently. Now we're in a situation where we have to continuously innovate, cycles of innovation. We have electronic capacities, which means that we can reprogram robots to do something different every hour, every day. So what we're doing, we let the robots work, but we need to collectively think through and design and develop new products, new processes, new ways of living, and that's why we are all kind of engaged in research development. That's why we also talk to each other all the time and plan in multidisciplinary teams what the next move are. And that's why we need to stay in touch, be networked, everybody with everybody else, continuously. It's a totally different challenge for an urban matrix to order and organize this much more rich and complex network of communication. That's what architecture is doing. And it can do that in a new way, in a more powerful way, with new tools, the way we work with algorithms and scripted systems, where we allow urban textures to self-organize according to rules, which are able to kind of adapt closely and intricately to complex environmental conditions. We can give particular constraints and criteria to these processes, and in this way we can create something which has much higher levels of intelligence, something we couldn't do intuitively, we couldn't do by hand. So parametrism is that new direction. The values are complexity, intricacy, but also legibility, of course, of complex environments, differentiated environments. And I'm promoting this style, and what you saw is falling within the paradigm of this style, and I'm also written that book for the old persons of architecture to look at this work in historical context, why it is important, why it is necessary, what's its superiority, and how to further upgrade these capacities. What does the discipline have to learn, what intelligence does it have to acquire to do the next stage? So I'm talking about the unified hegemonic style, which is in the formation, and is argued for by unified theory. The theory, which has been developed in these two volumes. The first volume sets the theoretical framework. I'm arguing for architecture in the context of the theory of society, which is a communication theory. I'm arguing that today, more than ever, all problems we face are problems of communication, and all solutions are generated through meaningful process of communication. So and there is a sociology which describes society as a process of communication, the communication process, and I believe that architecture participates within that, and that all our products, the spaces we offer like here, they are communications. This space invites us into particular communicative scenarios, into particular settings, particular expectations, and that's what it's all about. In the second volume, I'm looking at more detail how we can enhance architecture's capacity to deliver into that new network society. You can look up my website where I have links to the book and to some of the articles and interviews I've been giving and writing for a while. So the thesis is that parametrism is really supposed to start after modernism. Then with other styles like postmodernism and deconstructivism, they were transitional styles. They were the first reaction to the crisis of modernism, the impossibility of continuing the way the 20th century has been operated. And this impossibility also showed up dramatically, of course, in the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was built on the broadest paradigm of mass reproduction. And it's the most extreme form of modernism you find in the Moscow suburbs and in some of the industrial cities created in Russia, like Magnitogorsk. And this paradigm of developing society could not continue. So postmodernism was the first reaction, and deconstructivism, but these were temporary attempts, and out of that evolved the best ideas and aspects were selected by what I now call parametrizm. So the essential definition is that all elements of architecture have become parametrically malleable. That's important. And the advantage of this malleability of the elements is that they now can go into connection and association with each other. They can react to each other, adapt to each other, and therefore they create intense relations within the building complex, but also of the building complex into its context. So in the end, everything connects and communicates with everything else. So we have the ontological shift from this kind of repertoire, where architectural composition for 5,000 years was nothing but taking these primitives and just adding them up into composition 3, 4, 5 of them. And now we move into a situation where we have malleable, flexible, fluid elements, blind blobs, nerve particles, which engage into kind of complex interactions and generate a much more dynamic and rich and intricate spatial scenario. So when we're looking at the new tools in which we're working, instead of using a pencil and a ruler to create kind of depth lines, straight lines, or using a compass to create kind of same and monotonous circle lines, we're using these kind of arrays, we're using dynamical systems and allow them to aggregate by the use of attractors and repulsing elements and giving these elements different properties and allow them to self-organize in these beautiful, legible, complex ordered scenarios. And this is the way we're searching for designs, not by inventing or relying on the kind of poverty of our imagination and drawing a few rectangles or triangles. We are letting these systems search the solution space. And then some of our work comes out accordingly. So in terms of lines, and in terms of surfaces, of course, again, rather than just giving you a flat, dead, inert plate, we're having a surface that is sensitive to context, sensitive to impact. It has its own kind of differentiating will, form, and it kind of is alive. It kind of searches for form based on influences. And that's the way we develop the designs we're looking for. So these are the kind of surfaces, continuously changing and modulating surfaces, where a bench becomes a kind of a sofa, becomes a bench, becomes a shelf, becomes sculpture. And again, these kind of surfaces where we have one surface modulating and becoming seat, becoming balcony, becoming lighting entry, etc. And of course we do the similar things with volumes. So when we do our massing diagrams, we're using metaballs and blobs and again dynamical systems. And these are the kind of projects we're generating, where volumes fuse and separate and stay in touch and are sensitive to distortion and forces. And these are the kind of results we're generating. So these are the elements. Everything becomes parametrically malleable. These are the basic building blocks of all new architecture. They're radically different from the sphere, circle, and pyramid. And adding these together, we are talking about the kind of dynamic interplay of these new, totally new basic building blocks. But we also can go further. We can give principles of how to work with these, how to search for solutions with these elements. And there are both functional and formularistics, because this new style is not only about new kind of forms. Every new style should also have a new attitude and way of handling function, a new understanding of what the function, the social functions, the requirements of society are, and how to understand them. So we have to go through both a new set of formal principles and a new set of principles of understanding functions. I start with the formal principles. And the first important thing is that we need to really be rigorous and principled in really working with new principles and not falling back on old principles. So we need to be negative, we have negative heuristics. We need to say what we're no longer doing. We need to exclude, for instance, these rigid forms, which we should no longer work with. They simply lack complexity and malleability, and they need to be rejected. And I've been working for 15 years. I've never drawn a circle or a rectangle in the last 15 years. Neither has any of my students, colleagues, or friends. So this is really, in retrospect, a taboo. It's not to be done. Also, what we are rejecting is what has been happening all over architecture for 5,000 years, is this kind of repetition. You have an element just to simply repeat a solution. Simply lack of variety is not the image of our contemporary society. I haven't done it, and I will not do it, and this is to be rejected. It's also taboo. It's important to have these kind of start with the negatives. And what is also important to reject, what has cropped up since the crisis of modernism. So modernism was all about the simple forms, separating out and repeating. Since the breakdown of modernism, what we had was this accumulation of pure difference, just a collage of unrelated elements. And Moscow City is an example of it. Just anything goes. I call that the garbage still model of development. You can just throw anything together and just add anything whatsoever. And this creates a visual chaos, that lack of order, that you cannot navigate, you cannot orient. And this kind of pure difference, which is in fact what happened in the last 20 years all over the globe, which is in fact responsible for the fact that everything looks the same. Because if you take a garbage can, all the garbage cans have different stuff in it. Right? It's all different. But this different cancels each other out. In the end, the garbage still looks the same. It becomes this white noise of sameness. There's never identity. So if you just agglomerate pure difference, you never build up order, complexity, identity, recognizability. So this needs to be rejected. So where are we going? If we're rejecting the principles of architecture of 5,000 years, and we're also rejecting what spontaneously has happened since the crisis of this kind of architecture. There is somewhere to go, and that is to going to kind of natural systems. These kind of images we attracted to, these kind of intricate interplay of the water flow and the topography is a kind of locally generated, variegated, complex order. You find it in inorganic nature, you find it in organic nature, so it's rich, it's diversified, but it's ordered. It has an internal order of proliferation and differentiation. And it has this notion again, complex, variegated order. And that's what we're doing. And I think Klein Otto was the first to work in this direction. He is the first protagonist and anticipator of parametricism, because he didn't invent form or just repeat the known forms, circles, squares, triangles. He actually was allowing material systems, natural systems, to find form in a kind of complex balance of forces and boundary conditions. And we can do this, what he did with material systems, we can now simulate in the computer to generate a kind of second nature, and we can also be more free. We're not restricted to what we can do with physical models, but we use the same principles, and we can generate the second nature of lawfully differentiated dynamical systems, which we can push out of natural parameters. We can invent system subsystems, and we can creatively invent the laws of nature and inverted commas, which govern these artificial environments, but they have the same rigor and rule-based algorithmic structure like nature itself. So we become kind of inventors of second natures, and these are works of the students in Захi, the architects. This is my A students in Vienna and students in Innsbruck. So it's become a global movement of developing it. So endless forms, like nature, and we're doing also, we work like also still with material systems. When we don't rely only on software, we're first going into a natural system, material experimentations, and then you translate that into, try to bring that into the world of computation, and develop this interplay between material logics, computational logics, and the same we did in the office was using a do information, looking at codes and branching, erosion systems, etc. This is a great inspiration out of nature, but also you can be totally free and artificial, of course, in inventing dynamical systems. But it needs to be rule-based, it needs to be algorithmic driven. So that is what it looks like. We know what we're no longer doing, what are the taboos, but what are the positive principles which we always adhere to. And again, in retrospect, I realized the principles I'm delivering now, I've been adhering to without spelling them out for the last 15 years. So the positive principle is all forms are no longer rigid, they have become soft. So we always start with a primitive which is inherently parametric, inherently malleable. It could take many, many forms. It searches form and looks for influences and settles temporarily. And that means when you work like this, you always have hundreds of variations, and it could be a sofa, this primitive could also morph into the Chanel pavilion, etc. But what's important, this form, this softness is intelligent. So I can build in constraints, I can build in some structural requirements, for instance, like here. These are category models for domes, and I can think of whole clusters of domes, networks of domes, and they are following a kind of structural logic of how they intersect and integrate, and yet I still have lots of degrees of freedom to navigate and search the space, but I know that it is structurally sound, structurally efficient. So it's very important that we can have intelligent soft forms. We choose which parameters to fix and set as constraints, and which parameters to handle intuitively to search the remaining solution space, if you like. And then we can generate such. The second principle is if we have these parametrically soft elements and we then generate systems with multiple and many of these components, we need to make sure that we're not ending up with a kind of simple repetition. So instead we always differentiate. So we're always thinking of fields of differentiation. They don't stay the same. They kind of follow a kind of gradient logic of transformation and differentiation. And that's very important. And again, this differentiation can be made intelligent. For instance, you can follow environmental adaptive logic. So it's a kind of shading element, and as the shade changes direction, again, sun exposure, the element kind of adapts to that. And what is good about it, it makes the element adaptive, it's technically efficient, but also when you move along the surface, you can orient. You know, even on an overcast day, where south, north, east, west. And you have a kind of, you know in which direction you're moving. So it's also oriented, it's also communicating. Whenever you use rules, you allow participants to make inferences back and navigate. So we do that in a number of projects. You take directly engineering inputs, whether it's structural engineering input or here climatic information, and you can directly go to creativity lies in how you transpose the data map into an architectural adaptation. And there are of course hundreds of different ways you could do that, but in each way you find in the end a nuanced adaptation where you have an optimal shading effect at each point, and you can also orient
И также вы можете поиграть с ориентацией, покрутить, повращать. Ротация важна вдоль поверхности, вдоль поверхности.
And the same applies to urbanism. So instead of dropping the same block
вместо того, чтобы мы
across the field, an urban field, you can let
посмотрите, мы можем позволить
a kind of field of urban typologies
новые топологии, дифференциальные топологии, отвечающие на естественную топографию или на какие-то другие внешние элементы внешней окружающей среды. И мы можем получить нечто более элегантное, более дифференцированное с точки зрения пользователя. И дальше уже посмотрите, здесь возможно, у клиента есть возможность выбора, огромного выбора. И, соответственно, оценить рынок и изменить модель, ее несколько скорректировать относительно рынка. Очень важно, помимо дифференциации, это то, что нам необходимо коррелировать, корреляция, систематическая корреляция. Это технология всей математической модели, потому что есть математические подсистемы, которые отличают, смотрите, вот таким образом.
Adapting to each other,
Они
resonate with each other, so that one
они
system
взаимодействуют друг с другом, они чувствуют друг друга.
interacts with another, and in the
Мы
end,
получаем общую тенденцию, но тем не менее она начинает быть различимой, трудноуловимой изначально, но затем что-то меняется. Первая система здесь это система падений, спусков, вот таким образом, да, как спускаешься вниз, система балкона, дальше система освещения, это определенное правило. Каким образом вы можете войти в это пространство и найти свое место, и это создает своего рода правила, задачи, представления, и взаимодействие, ассоциация между двумя подсистемами. Это все равно, что, так сказать, как вот птица залетает в дерево, да, и взаимодействие с двумя деревьями. То есть действие и противодействие, и воздействие. То есть это не заканчивается здесь. Я предлагаю вас, приглашаю вас для того, чтобы вы представили свою реакцию, и это будет новый вклад, и определенный реакции. Это важно, да? То есть это может быть эффект такого снижения, то есть это своего рода, подиум там, здесь у нас может быть зона ритейла и так далее. И вот здесь, посмотрите, да, башня функционального пользования башни также меняется от квадратного плана к Т-образным
correlated with retail, office space, and residential space, and then the facade pattern also associates and modulates. It's a kind of rule of association where it changes from a closed facade to a curtain wall facade to kind of balcony facade. So the system has the capacity to correlate and respond and modulate relative to function, relative to power shape. And of course you can, the parametric model, you can associate the various subsystems and components so that they change together, but in fact in non-linear ways, in non-trivial ways. And here's an example of a tower where I say, you take for instance the different subsystems of the tower, the skeleton, the structural subsystem, it is not just the same all the way to the tower. That's the way the modernists did it, but it's irrational because the forces accumulate. The bottom is much more vertical force. The moment forces accumulate at the ground. So the stability and stress moments are much higher at the bottom and much less at the top. So I think you need to differentiate the skeleton along the vertical axis. You can also assume that the power is communicating with other powers, so it leans over, and then you get this kind of structural force diagram as an input into the design process. And first of all, you're saying, instead of having this system of always the same, the smaller power with the core in the middle, then outrigger, then cube system, there's the rational. This is better, where the skeleton differentiates. Он дифференцируется, все начинается с группки снизу, затем это определенная ядро, которое характеризуется вектор. Смотрите, ну здесь должен быть, конечно, инженерное очень хорошее обоснование этого всего. И тем не менее вы можете создать новую пространство, то есть это расшифровка структуры информации, что транслируется в новые структурные архитектурные сети диаграмм. И вот это, собственно, ваш акт творчества, ваше творчество, ваш талант. Вы это все раскодируете, транскодируете, вы это представите. И это есть способ, каким образом мы
можем интенсифицировать емкость структуры, подчеркнуть ее, артикулировать. Кроме того, мы можем менять более открытые, более закрытые пространства и опять создавать новое подпространство, новый язык, новое кодирование, новую кодировку. Вы не просто изобретаете это шаг за шагом, а это определенные правила трансляции формы башни в распределении различных закрытых пространств. Посмотрите, опять же, посмотрите, есть определенные правила, как эта матрица обычно создается. А давайте посмотрим, что мы можем делать в этой матрице. И затем мы задумаемся о ядре. И посмотрите, о ядре и роках. Соответственно, это будет организовано вот таким образом. Концентрическая часть. И затем уже вектора, они по-разному. Чем дальше, тем более плотно. Чем глубже, тем более плотно. И таким образом можно генерировать новый поток информации. Вот отсюда вы знаете, что ребра заходят глубоко в пространстве, эти лучи. И вот таким образом они будут скрыты. Каждый элемент коррелирует с чем-то еще. То есть всегда взаимосвязано. Он можно себе следует определенной логике. Переход из одного в другое. И наконец мы получаем нечто, что не просто прекрасно, потому что это в соответствии с законами природы. Но тем не менее мы создаем красоту, которую вы чувствуете, что она привлекает к себе, вы чувствуете, что можете доверять ей, она интересна, она возбуждает любопытство. Основные принципы лучше подходов там потерян, то есть это более новый, высокий уровень знаний. И таким образом, посмотрим опять же на мусор. Там нет слова, нет информации, его корреляции, но мусор, нас вообще это не интересует. Когда вы хотите туда что-то вышло, ткнуть ногой, забросить, и прожить вообще без нее. Но здесь, посмотрите, мы добавляем что-то, убираем. Вы можете не просто добавлять что-то и убирать. Убирать опять же соответствующие правила. Разрабатывайте правила, систему правил, требований. И таким образом модулируете это пространство. Все лучи имеют свой след, и, соответственно, у нас есть освещенность внутри. И мы видим коррелирующие подсистемы, коррелирующие между собой. И чем больше вы работаете, тем более изощренно использовать эту корреляцию, то есть определенный коллаж. Сначала это очень простой коллаж. Следующий шаг будет уже проще, новый уровень, новый слой добавляете, и упрощение каждого следующего шага общее картинка более сложный. Вы можете даже возможно какой-то элемент. Вы все это артикулируете, все это усиливает. Это всегда усиливает, если следуете основным принципам, если именно получают новую дифференциацию, новую графическую свободу и коррелируете с тем, что уже было. То есть в рамках этих проектов вы можете сделать даже более умное, красивое решение, если вы следуете этим принципам. Но если вы отходите от этих принципов, то вы просто все развалите и все весь проект. Итак, еще раз посмотрите, отрицательный листик атаку, избегайте твердых площади, треугольники, круги, простого повторения, сопоставления. Положительный листик, который полагаете, что все круглые, а также дифференцируется постепенно по различным областям, поднятие корреляции, систематически, о многосистемном сценарии. И преимущество – то, что мы чувствуем интенсивное взаимосвязь, взаимоотношения. То есть это о чем-то рассказывает еще, о том, где и почему. То есть фасад, например, вы смотрите на фасад, насколько глубоким является пространство. То есть каждый элемент взаимосвязан с другими элементами и рассказывает что-то. Соответственно, информация, то, что не видно, становится видно. То есть вы видите вот эти элементы заполнены, но вы понимаете, в каком направлении двигаться. Или, допустим, интеграция. То есть, соответственно, это интеграция различных систем, но плюс внешняя адаптация возможности. Посмотрим на урбанизм. Вот. Вместо вот этого ужасного копирования, кубизма, у нас есть два неокружных контекста, и мы добавляем третий. Здесь можем адаптировать
At the same time, we create radically different conditions, open, clearing, the sense power, small collage. There's radical difference, yet there's continuity and local differentiation. So it's easy to navigate. You can navigate and easily find and draw to this point or to that point. Say it again. So, and this is the power of parametrism. Something which is possible. You can give me any rugged and disparate collage of contextual elements, and I can come in and integrate them into coherent, elegant, differentiated new texture which has a lot of new qualities, but incorporates the old qualities and gives them a place in global order. So we're moving from, and this is still a kind of single system setup, just the fabric, the massing, but of course we're moving from simple massing, and this is another algorithm where you can pick up and create a kind of complex massing. But I'm interested also in multiple systems integrated, towers, with landscapes, with low-level buildings. And here is a system, for instance, that we use fluids. We're using different color fluids to generate an urban pattern. And then we're transcoding this information data set into different three-dimensional sets of information. But this is just a single system. All fluids are translated in one way. Here you can see that you can translate different fluids in different ways. So we have suddenly two systems, but they still interact like two fluids. So there's a kind of coherency and law and order in this with the richer environment. And now there's a kind of third system. So all these systems here, in a sense, are invented, created, transcoding of these fluids. The overall fluid dynamic is still in the system. And this tower rises because the fluid was more dense and less dense here, etc. And we're doing it again here in another project. This was in fact a Moscow city. And we're starting with a kind of field of particles or massing particles, and then we use that with a second system of distributing color and distributing these kind of network lines. So you can each density delivers a different shape and a different pattern of networking. And in the end, a few translations down and get this kind of image. So it's a very rich texture, there's a lot of difference, a lot of diversity, but they're all kind of following laws and logics. A bit more complex. You need to live there for a while to learn and understand these logics, but they are as logical as a natural environment. And the indigenous people in the jungle, they know how to read the environment. They can see where there's dry, there's the river, they can find the river just by watching how the vegetation transforms. And this is the same thing here. You can find things by seeing how the impact of the thing you're looking for ripples through the system. But this is all the formal principles. Now functionally, it's also important that the new style has a totally new attitude towards function. We're no longer thinking of function as a simple schedule recommendation with a handful of fixed stereotypes, residential, commercial, as if there was only one type of residential, and it was to be always separate. So these stereotypes, office space, is a meaningless concept. You need to understand the particulars of an organization, of a life process, you know, the large, small, medium-sized, mixed and unmixed. So these stereotypes are out. We're no longer assuming this social homogenization like modernism, which has to do with these stereotypes. And we're no longer working with this kind of executive zoning, where you kind of put residential here, retail here, and workspaces there, and separate everything out. That's all, these kind of things we're negating. We want to have the kind of intricacy of differentiation. So instead, positively, we're saying all functions are parametric. They're not stereotypes. They all have variables, and they're varying. So we're talking about variable event scenarios. We say all program domains are differentiated and potentially mixed. And we're saying everything communicates with everything else, instead of everything is separate. So it's important that the style has this kind of both the functional and the formal heuristic. So these are the functional principles in summary. Again, taboos and dogmas. Never think in terms of stereotypes. Never think in terms of speculative zoning. never assume social motivation, etc. Always think of parameters or values of the program. Always think of an event which challenge you. How do you differentiate from the program you're thinking about? And how you can think of having everything communicate with everything else. And it's always a challenge. What else can I make the space communicate with? What else can I take into account? Maybe something which is quite far away. How can that impact? And it's on this side of the site, even if it's 2 kilometers away, there's a kind of city center. It still should kind of asymmetrize, radiate and ripple through my texture. It's an infinite project. I can always have more things to correlate to. So it's a kind of heuristic which, the more I work, the longer I think it through, the more intense, the more beautiful, the more enhanced the project becomes. So these heuristics are ways of self-criticism. I'm still religious, I'm still stereotypical, I'm still working with and the invitation to continuously upgrade the project. That's why the kind of principles of, let's say, progressing the project, and I use that as well. And I can criticize all the works I'm showing, really principles, and show where I haven't gone far enough, what the next step should be. So, parametrizm, the new focus down after modernism. It's a new universe of possibilities, and it's radically different from what everything else existed in terms of repertoire, but the purpose is still to organize and articulate life. And the 2 books I published go through that, and I'm now, I hinted a little earlier, so it's a comprehensive theory which is based in architecture and communication theory. It starts with a discourse analysis of the discipline, so I'm looking at how over the centuries the discipline has evolved into categories, the distinction between form and function, the category varies of aesthetic values, etc., certain methodologies, and how they have been upgraded, how they have evolved historically, and how they should be upgraded in the next stage. That's very important here. First explain, and there's a lot of respect for the discipline. I'm not saying everything which happened was kind of horrendous and needs to be stopped. I have a lot of respect for the evolution of 500 years of architectural intelligence, and each stage towards progress, as you move from the Renaissance to the Baroque, there's progress into historicism, into modernism, but yet there's a next stage. And what is the next stage? How to upgrade the discipline. And the theory has attempts to integrate various partial theories one might have. For instance, most importantly, you need to understand architecture's unique societal function, to understand the core competency of architecture. How it is to be demarcated, for instance, against engineering. What is different between architecture, design, and engineering? And I think there's a big difference. Engineering is dealing with the kind of technicalities of an environment, and architecture deals with its kind of communicative capacity. It's also quite different from art. In design, there seems to be similar to art and still confused with art. Architecture is also confused with engineering. It's very important to be clear, right, what is so different against engineering, what is so different against art. Art never has instrumentalized. Art always remains this free play, this never taking stance, never kind of implementing and taking responsibility. There's a theory of the design medium, because it's very important, as you can see, the totally new tools and media of design. You need to understand the importance of the medium with respect to the universe of possibility it opens. There's a theory of the design process, there's a theory of aesthetic theory. Aesthetic values, they are shifting, they are evolving, they're different now than they have been, and the importance of aesthetic values. We are living by aesthetic sensibility. We don't have time each time when we step into an urban texture to analyze the pros and cons of a particular performance. We just navigate by intuitive aesthetic value. That's why we pick out our communication partners, why we pick out the environment. So it's very important. But it's important that we shortly upgrade, that we, for instance, collectively learn this kind of lust for complexity, that we love vital and complex environments, that we're not kind of scared by it, that we love change and the dynamism of life, and that we therefore also love these dynamic, complex environments. Because if you don't like them, you pull away, you can't participate, you will be unproductive, unhappy, and kind of a great person. So it's important to understand that the aesthetic values are what we always navigate and act upon. But at a certain point, we need to step back and reflect and critique them select them and then kind of rely on them once more. And that's what these kind of principles are doing. And then a few more. An important thing also, a theory of style, because I believe the concept of style is important because it's a great epochal paradigm of architecture. They make sense. If you shift from Gothic to Renaissance to Baroque to Historicism to modernism, we always we're tracking, architecture is tracking the great epochal shifts in societal conditions. So we're moving from the medieval feudalism into the Renaissance, we're moving to the kind of early capitalist city-states. Florence, there's a kind of new level of freedom there, religion is replaced by science, etc. So there's a kind of reflected in a new, actually the emergence of architecture as a theory-led creative discipline for the first time. Then we move from there to the Baroque. The Baroque has the capacity to articulate and order much larger complexes. The Renaissance is additive. Each element is internally symmetry, but it's additively composed. The Baroque has these huge sweeps of convex concaves, of asymmetric paths, integrating into huge global entities. The Baroque city, the Versailles, these are much larger complexes. And the Baroque has the capacity, with its plasticity and deep relief and curvature, to draw much more larger complexes together. So the Baroque is superior to the Renaissance. And again, we can go through historicism, modernism. In each new era, there is a new style, and as modernism collapsed, we still haven't found, well, I think there is, in the avant-garde, a new style which can claim that, take that stage, but it's yet to happen, and I invite all of you, of course, to participate in this. What's important here is that architecture, what it really does is explain communication. It allows all of us in this complexity of communicative situations and institutions which society consists of. Thousands of different types of events, of types of communication, of types of characters and lifestyles and work relations need to be ordered. And they ordered through the environment. If you imagine a city like Moscow, with all the things you have to do on a daily level and all the people, institutions and places you have to find to do your things you need to do, you imagine there is no city which tells you where everything is, and you have a huge kind of empty tarmac surface, and everybody is stripped naked, so you have no information. Nobody knows what to do, where they are, who they are, nothing can take place. So what the environment does, not simply keep the rain out, that's also engineering stuff, but the point is it orders us, it sorts all of us and all the events so that we navigate the city like a matrix where we can find appropriate and relevant communication partners in situations which are specific. There's a difference between a bar and entertainment and a nightclub versus a conference setting, a meeting, a lecture, all these different events, types of situations which we need to go through. This is what the urban matrix and the architecture does as an ordering system, as a language, as a semiotic system ultimately, a system of signification, which brings us together and puts us into the right mood, into the right constellations, like this kind of lecture, which is different from a seminar, different from a workshop, and each time we need settings specific. And that's what architecture delivers. So social order requires a spatial order. Architecture provides, in fact, the long-term social memory as a necessary substrate of evolution. So I'm saying, not only now we need the city fabric, always already, all societies needed the built environment, the complexity of it, as a social memory, as it actually only through evolving this built environment was society evolving. Without the built environment, you would still be kind of flock of apes roaming around, no progress, no cultural progress, because no DNA equivalent. And we have an evolutionary process of organism because there's a DNA, a material substrate which accumulates information, reproduces information, through trial and error includes new information, and that's reproduced. And this kind of material substrate, which is accumulating through trial and error information and then is stable, cross-generationally stable, can accrue and build up. That's the city. The city is in fact the physical DNA of cultural evolution. Without the city, no society. So this is the way, through this kind of device, and this now can build over decades and centuries and become richer and more complex, we can actually become a social organism if you like, more complex than a flock of apes. Every new generation they have to relearn, they kind of have no substrate, no cumulative build-up of order. And this orders society, it orders a particular subset of a larger group, it orders it in different status groups, it orders different activities, so you remember what to do, when to do, there are rituals which cling to this. This is what happens. I mean, this is like an information processing substrate, a kind of cumulative text which tells you who is who has which responsibility, who can marry, who can at what age cross the threshold, and what to do in a kind of ritualized. And that is a stable that can reproduce and now accumulate complexity. And you will also not find any society without this, without enhancing the social order through making social demarcation distinction. Like we, with the difference between male and female, we're still radically coding that. So in a split second, if you wouldn't have makeup and fashion, you might not even know who is male, who is female. But more importantly, of course, we are encoding a whole social universe in the fashion system. We're still relying on that. You can see the difference between a student and a banker. They might both be 27 years old, but you really know who to pick and who not to pick if you, in terms of criteria relevance. So that has always been the case, and that's now the domain of design. That's why I'm including design, fashion design, products, architecture, and also these kind of morphological, this kind of iconographic enhancement which we do to ourselves, we also do to our buildings. Not only the natural morphology they have, which we recognize, but we're kind of ornating and engraving, making these architectures. And this idea that architecture should speak was, of course, what was the demand of postmodernism. When society became more complex, lifestyles differentiated, this monotony of a crowded city, which was perfectly correct for a society where everybody had the same life, getting up at 9, going to the factory, getting the same, doing more or less the same, in that big kind of division of labor, that was perfectly fine. The image of the modernist city is the image of the modernist forest society, and there was a universal consumption standard. But now we're talking about architecture needs to speak again much more complexly, and then moving from postmodernism, in fact, to something like deconstructivism. Postmodernism did it by borrowing old iconography, and deconstructivism started to say, hey, we can kind of differentiate this way, but we can invent our own abstract new iconography and be more principled and systematic with that. And instead of separated zoning, we kind of integrate and layer and create kind of multiple superimposed systems to create this kind of, the lust for complexity was there already in deconstructivism. But it was kind of chaotic and in a sense generating in the end that garbage still, which is still better than the monotony. I rather have the kind of collage garbage still development than the kind of endless monotony of Moscow suburbs. But we took this idea of layers, of building up complexity, but now in a kind of ordered way. There are gradients, there are laws of association, schemes which encompass everything. And this was early 90s, when we started at Columbia University. It was still too chaotic, it was not very refined, with primitive computationally. But then we worked through the 90s on this and developed this style we're now mature and confident about, and now understand more its purpose, its power, its superiority, and that's why I think we are more than ready to roll it out into real. When we saw our projects, which we do in different continents and different function domains, we're going on all over the world, all function domains we're addressing, we're working on all scales, and we've grown from a company of 5 when I started to a company of 400. But it's still a drop in the ocean, so inviting you to participate. So this is some of the things we did in the mid-90s, competitions we all lost, but since the last 10 years we actually been more successful. So the style of function repeat is the innovative ordering and framing of communicative interaction on a new level of intensity, density, intricacy, etc. And the way I'm thinking about it, architectural order, we need to organize, we need to sort people in space, distancing them out, bringing together, separating, connecting, just the physical bodies, how are they kind of distributed? That's the question of organization.
Это вопрос организации в первую очередь.
The second question
Второй
is,
вопрос.
how do we kind of turn this into something perceptually palpable? It's not only physically ordering and sorting and connecting, but making that on a new level of complexity. The problem becomes, can I see this? Can I navigate this? Because it's not the object order which is important only, but the subjective legibility and comprehensibility of this order, because I rely on people to navigate this actively. So it's a question of articulating that order. And I articulated this for the sake of phenomenology, so perceptual palpability, conspicuity, that I can perceptually break down the scene, and as a system of science, a semiotic language. So the parametric organization, that's where we have to upgrade. What is complex organization? We know very little about these architects. We know maybe grids, and that's more or less it. We have no much else ordering devices, maybe access, maybe kind of symmetry. No, we need to go into a research of enhancing organizational patterns, organizational capacities, network logics. There's a whole mathematics we can work on. There's kind of, these points can be connected in all sorts of ways, and they make a big difference, both in terms of detour factors and quantitative efficiency, but also in terms of the political order of such a space. This one has a center. This one does have a kind of absolute center, and this one has a kind of grid where everything connects to everything else. So they make a lot of difference in terms of hierarchizing the space. This one has centers and sub-centers, so it creates positions, and these positions will create social identity. So in a sense, the spatial order will, in a sense, force and differentiate identity. There will be a struggle for this position, a struggle for this position, and it will give structure to the space. It's nearly inevitable. So we need to know about these things. We need to distinguish them, we need to understand them, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And there's been research like this also in terms of efficiency, the systems, total network length versus total detour imposed. But I'm more interested in the political and social ordering capacity of these systems. And the same is with arrays of cells. These are the different kind of network configurations you can embed in this plan diagram, which is more telling than the plan shape. Or if you look at this looks the same, but through different openings and closings, you have totally different, you kind of rings versus kind of branching system versus kind of deep space. These are also intelligence you need to acquire. Or here, these are different ways. This space looks like this from the position 19. From the position 15 it's quite different. You can go in 3 directions first, 1, 2. So that we have to look at the organization we're working on. We have to first grasp the potential. We also need to know that it's position specific, what the organization is. And we can start to work with kind of flows and connection and multiple and changing connections. So that's the world of geometry, the world of organization. The next point is kind of, and that's parametric organization. Phenomenology, we're working with kind of how you perceive things. You see vertical lines here, and you see horizontal lines here. Because there's proximity, you see similarity also draws these things together. So there's different ways to break down a scene. You see kind of circular territory, although they're objectively and physically not there. It's just the way our perceptual habits allow us to order this kind of chaos of points into a kind of structure. So we need to understand how we break down scenes. We usually follow curvature along. So this one, you see is 2 lines crossing. You could have seen it as 2 or 2 like this, pointing, meeting, but we don't. So there's a privileging of the continuous line, for instance. Or this one, we privilege convexity. So this results like this and not 2 K's or 2 an M and a W. It could be. We can also play with this. This is an ambiguous figure. It could be 2 K's. It could be an M and a W. What's that? So we can play with it. We reckon with that. Nothing is objectively there in the real environment. This bottle is trivial. I know it's one object because I can move it against the background. But in this ensemble of buildings, it's very unclear how I should decompose the scene into objects Am I seeing this whole space as an object? Am I seeing this as one object versus the second object? So the decomposition of entity, what are the unities of interaction? What are the units? What is the composition I perceive? It's always an act of perception. It's always an act of comprehension. And that we need to grasp. And that is also a power of having one objective setting, giving it several potential mental decompositions and readings. So everything has to be considered. So we're looking at figures round reversals, we're looking at the empty space, we're looking at the full space of the figure. We know that we're using symmetry, and that we have that the symmetry becomes most powerful when it starts as an amorphous. If I have a symmetry between one simple symmetry and put the next one to, it's not very powerful as symmetry. But the more amorphous, the more powerful the symmetry in terms of an object. You can see figures in an open texture. So what is that? It's just abstract stuff that tell you that there's a woman with a guitar. You might be able to start seeing something. If I give you this, and then you look across, again, you start to see a woman and a guitar. So this is this act of perception which depends on the way you break down and always ambiguous in a sense, perceptual world in the figures, foreground and background, and where we led by prior conceptions. So I can also take this into account. I can prime you into this space and bring you to another. You come from one side into the space, you see something. You come from another side, you see something else. So different audiences can be given different settings, even though objectively there's only one thing there. So you have all these context effects. These lines are in fact the same. These lines are straight. These lines are straight. The color of these dots is exactly the same as you can, as I'm proving here. So there's lots of these are the same again. And there are these kind of context effects. And this is the kind of image where I think this is what the contemporary architecture should be like. It should be a kind of field of stuff which has multiple ways of resolving itself into a reading into a composition. So here you might see the guitar on the table. It's still live. It's probably still live. But in reality, if you look at it again, you might say maybe there is no guitar. The guitar falls apart because the whole of the guitar is just a top plate on a pile of plates. This is just another shape like an armchair pushed against the table. These kind of tensioning devices are just tops of the bottle or pipes. Then you see here the book, parts of the book together with the glass create a second bottle. So these are the kind of games, perceptual games if you like, we always in fact are at play, and we should upgrade our architectural intelligence to play with this consciously and work with this consciously, simply with the fact because there is no objective constitution of the great environment. There is always a reading, and we can guide that reading, we can work with that reading. And there are always multiple readings depending on observer position and observer history as well, and how much we are socialized in the environment. So this is a kind of sculpture by Michael Heitzer. You can see a kind of a set of fragments which resolve itself into a clear figure from a particular view and then resolves again. And we've done that with a number of projects. This is a kind of cluster of tower, and this is the same cluster looked at from different sides. And you can now see the same transformation happening. There is one objective happening which has four different perceptual registrations. So here you on this side you have opening up to the top, here you have opening up to the bottom, and here you have something in between. So these are images of the same model. In top view looks actually quite perfect. So this is the way we work with it. Or we're looking at this, an objective geometry seeing a square grid. As the camera moves, it changes into a circle pattern. So it is objectively seen, well, it's a certain shape, but it appears as a grid at one stage, as a circle pattern at another stage, only by moving your perspective, your view. And here's the reverse. You have an actually seen, and top view gives you a circle packing, and in perspective shift, it at some point looks just like a grid.
С какой-то точки это будет выглядеть как решетка.
And then looks like an intensified wave. So you can have one object giving different character, identity to different perspectives, then it associates potentially with different things. So you can kind of continuously replay, reorder the elements of the composition, and therefore you can reorder our communicative behavior, what we're looking for, how we gather. And this is another one where we're just taking observer, the parametrics of object parameter, ambient parameter, light and shadow, and observer parameter. Shift, this is only shifting obviously camera position again. It just swivels, it's one object, static, stable object, nothing changes in terms of the shape, but they seem to be creating waves and individual blobs and then waves again. So that's what I do under the heading of parametric phenomenology. So we have parametric organization, we have parametric phenomenology, and we have parametric semiology. Most important, the kind of creating the built environment as a semiotic system, making systematic correlations between form and function, and in a very nuanced way, and that creates the design project has for me these two layers. I start with a general partie with some kind of sense of organizing pattern, but we also remember that it's going to be in the end relative to phenomenological resolution, and it's also in the end most importantly a semiological project, because we're not only perceiving, we're reading these things as signs. So and science has the kind of domain of the signifier, which is just this physical stuff, and the signifier, the meaning, this physical stuff points us towards. So in terms of architectural terms, you see a kind of surface and you realize this is the plaza, I'm allowed to go here, I might expect certain people here, I can behave in a certain way. That's the meaning of that surface. Is in fact our behavior relative to it, ultimately. Its function, its use. So the meaning of the word is also its use, as Wittgenstein told us. The meaning of a certain word, hello, is its function, its use, what I'm doing with it. The space, the meaning of the space is its use, form signifies function, and how does it do it? How does a certain space, a certain signifier generates and acquires a meaning through distinction, never by itself. Always a system of distinctions, a system of differences, which in the domain of the signifier, in the domain of forms, all the differences in the end are correlated and coded in terms of functional or behavioral differences. That's in the end what it's all about. And there's a kind of these two worlds, the world of form and the world of function, they confront each other, and they kind of, the differences in the one domain, they kind of interact and in a sense lock into the differences of the other domain, and only then we actually get determinate identities. And each language sets up different differences and cuts up the world in different ways. And that makes also that these different languages might not be translatable into each other, because in the end it's not meaning to meaning, or one word with one meaning, but a system of words that builds up a system of distinction, which is then mapped onto a system of social distinctions, if you like. And you can look at now the visual languages, and it's very primitive, a kind of traffic sign system. And we can create spatial languages, a kind of coding of different relationships on a very abstract level. Something which is more closed, less closed, slightly open, totally open, a public space, more social space, a personal space, an intimate space. And we can do that with this kind of gradient, and then we can maybe now, with this kind of thing in mind, we generate fields, and we try to kind of read this field with this coding in mind. And if we now program accordingly, in the end, if you navigate the space, you might kind of learn, like you learn a language, experience the correlation, not by learning a kind of vocabulary. And we can kind of try to make the built environment very systematically, with a grammar, with a vocabulary, with building it up as a kind of language. And you learn the language by encountering it in its use, systematically. You don't need to kind of go away and learn this, you learn it kind of habitually entering and working and moving through the space. And the unit which is significant in the architectural language is always a territory. Like in verbal language, it's the sentence, not the word. A word by itself has no meaning. If I say dog, you don't know what I'm not telling you anything. I don't know what I'm talking about, why am I saying it, what am I saying? I'm saying nothing basically. I'm saying sky, what? But if I tell you, take the dog out, then you know what I'm saying, you're doing something. The same as with architectural language, it's actually a territory, a single column has no meaning to it. Just a kind of formatting, materiality has no meaning. It's always when materiality, certain morphologies construct the territory, space, and it doesn't need to be an enclosed space, just the territory, then that acquires a meaning, because as I enter or exit the space, that makes a difference with respect to what I'm expecting. If I'm crossing a threshold into a territory, I might have to adapt my behavior. If I'm moving from outside to inside, from the public sphere into the courtyard. This is the communication that now changes everybody's behavior, and therefore makes a new institution, a new situation possible, and it orders people in new ways. So that's why a kind of the language of architecture has the kind of territory as the minimal significant unit. And it can either be accepted or rejected. You either enter or exit. You accept or reject my command, take out the dog. Every communication has kind of that capacity to be accepted or rejected. And we work, for instance, with a student project where we tried this systematically, creating first of a kind of organizational diagrams using color coding and certain labels, and in the end these color codes and the labels are replaced by morphological distinctions, positional distinctions, text, material, texture distinctions, etc. So in the end, all what I need here to know what I'm doing is being replaced by design itself, and the information is preserved and even enhanced. So it becomes a very information-rich. So the difference between a faceted shell versus the creased shell versus the smooth shell is the difference between, for instance, the School of Science, the School of Arts, the School of Humanities in a university. They're different shapes, which mean lecture, library, workshop, seminar, and they can now be combined. So there's now the lecture in the art school, the lecture in the science, the lecture in the engineering department. So these two are kind of overlapped and combined. And so we build up a kind of repertoire. And again, we work parametrically in different scales, different sizes, and we look at structural system, for instance. And yes, we need to structure, it's a technical issue. When I'm saying use it also as an articulation issue, use it as a coding issue. If the structure in a space gives the space character, identity, a large space has large themes, the direction of the themes gives you a sense in which direction is the space longer. If it's in contemporary engineering, the kind of deep beam in the center means in the center of the space. So if you have an intricate adaptive engineering, it tells you a lot about the shape of the space. You can also use it as characterizing the space. Use the large space, the public space. I'm saying our task in this is to use engineering intelligence and turn engineering forms into an articulation medium and characterize and articulate space and bring that into a systematic system of signification and build a language which is the same with all the environmental engineering aspects, with resoleils, with shading elements, with openings, with framings, with joint lines, with tessellations, all these things. They become a medium of articulation, part of a semiotic code. That's the way we kind of work. So with each of these decisions, you have always many possibilities technically. And you know it's going to be parametrically differentiated, because also the functions are going to be parametrically differentiated. And our task now is to make this stuff speak, that everything I encounter gives me information, tells me something. So I can work in this way that I'm having always an excess of of formal material, and I think of interpreting it, and interpreting it means using it systematically. That all the entrances are a particular way of framing, so I can recognize the entrance, etc. So here you can say that every different type of living has a different functionality encoding, or a different social encoding. I'm also saying it's not only different types of interactions to be distinguished, it's different social types. Is it the student, is it the member of staff, is it the main for visitors, for the general public? So different social types need to be distinguished as well. And this is a kind of, I can't go into detail with this, and the morphologies are drawn from these kind of simulations. The morphology is very rich and diverse, and now turn it into a kind of grammar, into a kind of semiotic system. And in the end I have, strong identities, different articulations with different meaning, interacting with different ground values. And just give you a glimpse of this, the way this might look. In the end, you have something which has a complexity, a richness, an orderedness, correlative intensity, but when you now think of the life process which moves through it, you can find how this codes social type, how this codes function type, how this codes interaction scenarios, and everything makes sense and guides you and has meaning. Of course, that is a kind of very demanding project, and there might still be excessive, uninterpreted elements which are now interpreted through appropriation and new rules of use, use that texture and invent, of course, audience participation in a sense in that final encoding is required. And we can just speculate. In the end, the actual life process will speak that language, will morph that language, will change that language. So this is the way we're looking at the world of spatial signage. And again, it's intricate, it's interesting. It's on the one hand, and again, it's subjective in many ways. What is one sign, signifier even versus another? You need to rely on the kind of socialized reader. These look very, very similar, but they're all different. They're clearly discrete in the letters of the alphabet. They look very similar, but mean something radically different. This one, they look all radically different, but they're all the same. They're the letter A. So you have a huge scope to use the distinction between A, B, and C, and you can use all of these in the end could be the A. So you have an enormous richness of using and reusing distinctions, and there's nearly no limit on the final terminology of that. So this is to be considered. So just to go through this, these are the kind of, to make this work, the architectural semiotic system should not speak about the world, politics, and symbolize things outside the institution. The building should speak only about itself and what takes place within it, and the kind of communication facilitates. So the question is really to constrain the domain of the signified to then be really effective. So what would the user like to know about the parity? What can the parity communicate about itself? That's the question. So first of all, what can happen here? That is a function type. Whose space it is, who is welcome here, who might I expect here, the social type, but also where am I here, where can I go from here? So you also encode within the space what to expect beyond its ambit. So there's also this aspect. So there is a kind of denotation, the connotation of social type, maybe navigation. These are the fine functions I've been distinguishing. And in the end, it's all about distributing and all this manifold of communicative situations which contemporary society consists of, to kind of somehow distribute that and unfold that and connect it and make that navigable and available to all of us, so that we can find each other and get brought into particular constellations, so that we have specific, relevant communications to go through. So, for instance, the difference in universities between a lecture, seminar, workshop, and the library is all oriented to one, all oriented to all, many oriented to many, all separate, all kind of, let's say, on the level of abstraction, gives you clues how maybe to structure these different types on a kind of organizational level, and then you can kind of encode them through additional semiotics, if you like. And what I'm now going to do is, the final step is how am I actually working on this. I've been showing you these images, I've been labeling, you know, what is the different types of functions you can write into the spaces, but this is quite tedious and also makes it difficult to overcome stereotypes. So I'm writing here the kind of foyer, here's a kind of half foyer which is more intimate and has is only for students, and the other one is for fun. So I have to write a lot. I want to be quite nuanced and different, and it kind of keeps migrating. So it becomes very difficult to work on and keep track of. And anyway, I found a way to integrate the meaning level into the model and work on the model with what it's all about, namely the nuanced interaction scenarios and the behavioral dispositions and biases and event scenarios, which I call the meaning and ultimate purpose and destiny of these spaces, because we as architects, using space, the purpose is to order social communication, to frame and order social communication. And to show that, I'm saying we can actually do that now by bringing into the model the meaning of all these spaces and features and distinctions and forms and materialities by crowd modeling. I can now bring the domain of the signified, the meaning domain, into the architectural model in the form of crowd and aging model. So I'm saying, I mean, these different patterns and interaction scenarios, in this case there's a kind of rather unstructured environment, but there's still demarcation line, objects, and so on. This kind of gathering and structuring, and this is what we want to kind of bring into the model. The architecture here is quite neutral, but of course it will also be more details where we start to look at how people react to environmental features and how their behavior and the overall event is ordered by that. The technology is available to architects at the moment primarily in terms of technical efficiency of evacuation of streaming. It's a kind of mainly an issue at the moment of engineering the traffic flow through evacuation flows for fire and so on. So it's kind of fluid dynamic of crowds. That's what has been done at the moment in the context of architecture, and we do that more and more in our projects in airports and train stations, but it's not really about the light flow, it's only in the event of the fire. But you can see here that the capacity of these tools is quite powerful. Large groups, you can differentiate different characters and types, and you can play with that. So there's a whole kind of computational power of simulating crowd behavior. And that's the way you can integrate. And here again it's the kind of primarily about evacuating a space and so on, which is boring, but I'm saying simulate all the life forces, all the institutions, all the communication scenarios, and the capacity is being built up at the moment. So we've done little studies already, like 3 years ago. You can simulate human behavior with very simple automatisms when it comes to circulation. For instance, here you can see here how the two groups stream against each other and they order themselves into laminar flow, into left and right. There's a spontaneous symmetry breaking and a kind of seemingly intelligent behavior, which is purely the kind of emergent order. Now if we go to the next one, you have an opening, and then you have also experienced in an underground that you have the two streams separating to left and right, and here you have them separating into a before and after, which is also, as you observe, a narrowing point. You have crowds coming, there's kind of orders in time, before and after. Now these are still in the domain of simple circulatory flow and getting a handle on that. But this is what our students can do maybe in half a day after they've heard about the phenomenon. It's very simple. And now we go a bit further. We actually have new tools, for instance the Maya plugin called Miami, usually for the gaming industry. There's a massive another tool for where you can have different characters and different collective behaviors. And again, the moment it is just people reacting to people. But what is important, how people react to environmental clues and the people-to-people relation changes relative to the environment they're in. So here is again only a group of people moving through an opening step. So this is just warming up, letting the students and because this is not what we do in the office, this is the kind of research I'm doing at the AA and other studios, and we're moving into more interesting things. We're moving into so-called functional crowds, so that it's not just generic bodies moving and keeping kind of distance and so on and jamming together, but different settings now triggering different behaviors, different communicative behaviors to do with the furniture, with the texture of the surface. And this is research which is done, in fact, also in the game industry context, because we want to create scenes in which autonomous agents, in fact, are behaving. You don't have to do a frame-by-frame simulation. You just let agents roam through your environment and they will do the appropriate thing because they can read the influence by environmental clues. And that's what we're going to work on. That's what we do. We want to simulate, cocktail party. You want to simulate the scenario where you go to the party, you start with a cocktail, then kind of there's a little stage, the host makes a speech, there's a reorientation, then you move on to a kind of bar situation, dinner situation, after dinner kind of informal sit down with intimate communication. There's a whole differentiated unfolding of nuanced communication scenarios. And it's been a good event if you had met lots of new people. Some of you were able to get into deeper conversation, and then you had a kind of some very kind of intense conversations in a corner. And so you need to have corners. So the point here is how to work with it. And again, we're using different tools to start to look at blocking, look at how attraction points in space, entry points make a difference. And the problem here is to actually evolve a satisfying, intense, enriching communication scenario by using just the space to order and program the actors by giving them behavioral clues. And I think we all can learn and we move into a new environment. We know that we can be given, rules, and we can be given dispositions. When we enter a space, when we open the door, we kind of calm down, we quiet down, we know how to behave. And we started to introduce kind of architectural actors into the mix. This is again more like fluid, this is also stuff we can work on different levels of abstraction and just now we have we introducing kind of architectural actors that don't need to move themselves, but they could move as well. And so you have a little bit of behavior that you gather around such an object. And these are not animations which are frame by frame, these are autonomous, let loose in an environment, right? So, and you're trying to, first of all, get a handle on different dispositions, how people react to each other and relative to an object, to an architectural attractor. You start with very simple things of people recognizing each other and approaching each other, sitting down. I mean, it's very, very basic, but we're starting to introduce architectural features. And there is certain chance. It's not deterministic. There's a certain bias only. It's not that things have to happen, but there's a likelihood of things happening. If you have a counter somewhere in the corner, and there's a likelihood of one standing, somebody else gathers and connects. And this gets more interesting. So here we're saying you can inscribe biases. For instance, we're giving the floor different zoning or different textures. So the blue areas are the ones where you might kind of slow down and gather, and the red areas where you keep circulating. So you can encode behavior, and therefore the environment is ordering the overall global pattern based on the local individual dispositions and rules, meanings you give to the different features. So here we have another scenario where you have a marker or something. So the different textures of the floor imply different speeds of movement. So the fast movement in the middle and the slower movement to the edge. So you can kind of generate potential for additional activities at the edge, etc. And this way you can experiment in your model with meanings, with dispositions, and you can generate and work on an overall scenario in which the architectural order is critical in ordering the event. And again, if you observe it, you can see what's going on, how the different zones solicit different behavioral dispositions. So that the actor changes his behavior as he crosses thresholds. As he crosses that threshold, it kind of speeds up. These are very simple models, but I think you can have topography and make topography do work of ordering the situation. And here it is most clear, perhaps, that you have as the new territory is encountered, behavior changes. And the interesting thing is here that the territories themselves can be shifting and moving and adapting. So you can have a dialectic between different territories and different behaviors, but also you can shift the territories around either by kinetics, by opening and closing divisions, or by simply that perceptual reconfiguration I was talking about earlier. So here you have a very powerful paradigm of how the environment and maybe even a dynamically learning and adapting environment is structuring behavior. And this is the idea that you also might leave traces. So there might be an interactive environment where the actors, these traces, they're trace following, maybe that is a certain time factor, and they kind of, there's an interaction now between an environment which kind of structures behavior, and then the behavior in turn restructures the environment. There's a whole dialectic, a whole kind of evolutionary process. And you could also see here that there could be a kind of interactive correlation between environmental elements and behavioral elements. And so we're working on this kind of responsive environments which kind of reconfigure based on behavior and then kind of restructure a new behavior. We've done that kind of many years ago with these simple models where we're trying to anticipate how an object could be reconfiguring and changing the kind of social diagram of the kind of interacts with users. But at that time, we kind of thought through the behavior and made a kind of frame-by-frame sketch, whereas today we actually working with autonomous agents, where we only have to observe what they do. They do to some extent what they want according to particular biases. So here they just orient by the wall, or here they It's very primitive stuff, of course, so, but here the wall flattens down and becomes a kind of place to sit down.
Если это более изогнутое, то это может быть место, где можно присесть и так далее.
So from now on, I'm saying I want to develop my architecture always in that interaction, in that kind of sense where I'm conscious and aware of the fact that what I'm really trying to do when I lay out these spaces, when I articulate these spaces, I want to give clues, I want to give behavioral clues, I want to think of actors socialized to read the environment, to individually behave, but then creating a collective outcome, and I can do that now in ways which are more nuanced as well. And there's different ways of walking. I might be strolling in a different way in a public space from a kind of more intimate space. When I move onto the carpet, I'm kind of slowing down and so on. Yeah, so that's the project in terms of really kind of the societal function of architecture, that, understanding that and upgrading that technologically and making it a new project on a new level of sophistication. So thanks for your attention, and I'm also available for dialogue and questions now. Thanks.